Hi, welcome along to Live on Air this Sunday evening, 21st of February. I'm David Bell and I'm interviewing Stuart Macadam, CEO of Cinema Addicts this evening. And we've got quite a few questions that we want to get through, looking at films and events and what's hot in the movies for 2016 and a whole heap of things. Just a welcome from you, first of all. Stuart, would you like to just introduce yourself for any that don't know you?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Stuart Macadam. I'm 23 years old. I founded Cinema Addicts, which is a movie reviews website, in 2014. And yeah, for work, I do a lot of marketing work and also a lot of writing.
You do a tremendous amount of marketing work and writing, Stuart, that's for sure. So without any further ado, we've got a couple of viewers that are with us, and just an invitation to the viewers that as we go through the program, please do put in your question and answer if it's there available for you to do so, and we'd love to hear from you. Let me just see. I brought up our screen share. I'm presenting to everyone. We've got 4 slides that we're looking at with 4 particular questions tonight. And the first one, Stuart, is what's happening in your world of marketing, and what does 2016 hold for both you and for Cinema Addicts?
Yeah, so for 2016, I think it's going to be a fantastic year for me because I've been working with a lot of clients recently. I just finished a 3-month stint as a content marketer at Perceptive Research, which was absolutely fantastic. I learned a tremendous amount from them and they were very good to me. And now I'm currently working at building up relationships with my old clients last year who I did a lot of work for. And one of my big focuses, I guess, on Cinema Addicts is that we're currently got an ebook in production, which is going to discuss how people who make movies and are fantastic at doing that can effectively promote and share their film with the world. We're also looking to create a blog and interview section, which is a unique section on Cinema Addicts, because currently there is no individual section for either of those things, and we're finding that a lot of our posts more and more are being geared towards interviews and also, I guess, specialist general interest movie information, which is very suitable for blogs. So those are just a few of the things. We're also looking at bringing on board some more writers and movie reviewers, and I'm sure later on you'll mention, David, some of the review work you've done for Cinema Addicts.
Yeah, well, my work, Stuart, is very, very little. I can say that for sure. We've got a number of viewers with us now. We've got 4 live on air. I'm not quite sure what has happened to the Q&A pod, because I'm doing this actually from YouTube, and so some of the screen settings that I normally have aren't readily available to me. So I'm sorry if you can't find a way of inputting into the Q&A. Well, Stuart, you've got a lot on your plate. You're re-establishing a whole lot of marketing things which I think are very, very relevant to Kiwi Connection and all the things that we do, because, as you know, we're of an older generation in the Kiwi Connection, and we don't necessarily understand all of that marketing world. But what we do know is that we enjoy to watch movies, we enjoy to watch TV and that kind of thing. So as you explore these new marketing ideas and options, have you got any clue for us about what might be hot and trending in the world of cinema and movies this year?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think you can always pick up on the vibes which the general public, movie-loving public has, and particularly with trends on social media, you'll begin to see and recognize a lot of the excitement and anticipation for a particular film. So I would say definitely yes. You always pick up on it, and you don't even have to be online to know that those trends are quite hot at the moment.
What about, you know, if we were looking at the genres of movies, from the big blockbusters, comedy, things like that, have you picked up anything that's really a hot movie in the last month or two, say in the world of comedy or horror or action?
Well, you know what, David? I think I have. I mean, I was sort of trying to distinguish exactly what 2016 and as a year in film would be dubbed as or remembered as. And I initially thought it could be the year of the remake because, as you might know, there's the remake of The Jungle Book coming out. There's going to be a remake of Ghostbusters as well. And then I thought about it and I thought, oh, that's only a few. Then it came down to maybe it's the year of comic book films. There's Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. There's Captain America, Civil War. And there's also X-Men Apocalypse. Those are just three of a few. And then I thought to myself, well, is it really going to be like that? It seems to me to be a cluster of everything. And I think it's only when we get to the end of the year where we will actually recognize what type of films have actually come out and established themselves as the winners, because a movie can be watched and forgotten pretty quickly. A lot of big names that were big yesterday are more or less unknown today. But when it comes to actually remembering the great ones, I think that's what will sort of distinguish it. So you probably need about 2 or 3 years to actually make a good judgment call on. But I think it'll be the year of remakes and action hero movies or comic book movies.
Well, that's a really interesting perspective because I'm picking up that there could be some really quite gem movies in the world of comedy. And for my generation, as opposed maybe to the 15 to 30-year-old generation, one of the ones that's currently in there is Dad's Army. Now, this was a TV series that had enormous popularity, you know, 30 years ago, and went through repeated viewings on TV. But there's also another one that's got Dame Maggie Smith in. It's called The Lady in the Van. And that looks like being a quality script from a very well-known British writer. I think he died a year or two back. Have you heard anything either about Dad's Army or The Lady in the Van and seen them at this point?
Yes, well, my mother actually went to watch Dad's Army earlier on this week, and she's, as far as I know, I think actually published the review on Cinema Addicts, or if it hasn't been published, it's certainly very close. And it does seem like one of those films which the older generation will resonate with in the same way I think a lot of our generation will resonate with, say, a film series like the you know, the Jason Bourne films 30, 40 years down the track. Or maybe it might be the case where you'll find some films have actually managed to successfully reinvent themselves over and over again, such as the James Bond franchise.
Well, the James Bond franchise, I think, is absolutely fascinating because in one way it just doesn't get killed off, does it? It keeps popping up time and time again. New actors, but the actual genre is kind of a fixed genre.
It's always amazing because, I mean, James Bond in several films has been absolutely useless at actually trying to get rid of the bad villain. I remember watching Goldfinger and just thinking to myself how stupid a supervillain like him could be to not kill off James Bond so quickly, when despite having about 50 opportunities.
Okay, well, I think that's really helpful. And what I'd like to do now is bring up our second question. Now, just bringing the screen share over. And what I've asked here is, this is particularly a sort of a night school Trinity Waiake kind of question. A lot of New Zealand work has been recognised on the international circuit. now you've asked me, in terms of shaping this question, whether we would like to know a bit more about that, and whether we'd like to know a little bit more about what's going to happen this year in New Zealand film. So what was the sort of New Zealand work that you were thinking about might be recognised this year, Stuart?
Well, it's actually been off to a fantastic start so far, with the announcement that 2 Kiwi films are going to have their premiere at the 2016 Berlin Film Festival, which is no easy feat to get into, considering how competitive it is to get in the first place. The first of those is called Mahana, which is a Lee Tamahori film, who you may remember directed Once Were Warriors. There's Born to Dance as well, which made $1 million at the New Zealand box office. And both films have been pretty well established and obviously got some reputable names to them. I'd also like to mention Karthu Neil, and he'll be premiering 2 films which he produced at this year's Sundance Film Festival. First one is Tickled, and the second one is Hunt for the Wilder People. And thirdly as well, there's also Finola Dwyer, who was recently recognised for her production role in the film Brooklyn, and she received a BAFTA award for that. And then, of course, there's the New Zealand Film Festival, and I'm sure we'll see plenty of other films which emerge from the shadows. But at the moment, there hasn't been a huge amount of talk about New Zealand films. There's been a lot of hype and mention of some potential projects, but as far as actually recognizing which ones are going to come out and be big, that's something we'll have to wait eagerly in anticipation for, because I'm sure everyone's hard at work finishing them off, as you'd expect at this time of the year.
Yeah, I think, Stuart, I'm just going to leave the question sitting up for me at this point, because you've really hit upon quite a few really interesting films in there. The Lee Tamahori one, as you say, an ex-James Bond director. I think I only ever did one. I don't think it was meant to be one of the greatest James Bond films ever made.
Had the unfortunate experience of having Pierce Brosnan as his Bond, so anything with him is rather forgettable as far as James Bond goes.
Oh, fair enough. I think the question that most of my generation really want to know about: how has it come about that New Zealand has become so successful, so recognised on the international circuit? How come there are so many creative Kiwis in film? How come that, you know, production houses like Peter Jackson, etc., have moved here? What's the key issue that's going on that's driving this kind of creativity in movie making in New Zealand at this point in time? Because it's not as if they're getting huge government subsidies or, you know, extra monies. And what's the creative thing that's happening in your opinion?
Well, I think it comes down to 3 things essentially. The first one is you look at cost, and New Zealand has done a lot of marketing work ever since Lord of the Rings to try and attract international filmmakers to come down here. And I think you will have heard in the newspapers, both Helen Clark and John Key working quite hard to offer very attractive packages to have films like Lord of the Rings, have The Hobbit, King Kong, and Iron Man as well, have some sort of work brought here and done. The second would probably be Kiwi ingenuity, or the number 8 wire mentality. So that's a lot of work with which New Zealanders are doing to bring their film ideas to life whilst working on a very limited budget. And that often presents a lot of challenges as well, because not all films, in fact probably about 99% of films, don't have those big budgets. And finding ways to innovate successfully can really go a long way in making a fantastic film. And the third thing I would say would just be the general freedom to be creative. Like in the United States particularly, you notice that there's a very tight rope which you can walk on in order to make a successful film, because the bottom line is it has to be about financial results, and the creative process is often overlooked in the way of making money. Whilst in New Zealand, I think the focus is first on perfecting your craft and making sure you're successful at that before you think about making films for commercial reasons.
Now that third point's a really interesting one. Let's take a director like Quentin Tarantino, and recently he put up The Hateful Eight. Now, from your perspective, because you've promoted that, I think you've seen it and it's certainly reviewed and so on. What would you say that he started with a commercial objective in mind, or did he want to tell a tale, albeit a violent tale, from the outset? Was he more interested in the craft, or was he more interested in the monetary outcome? Because he's a big name in movies.
Yeah, I don't know if you can remember, I don't know who ever said this as a quote, but they said, find something you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. And I think with Quentin Tarantino, that's very much the case. If you have a look at some of his early work, such as Reservoir Dogs, that was made on an absolute shoestring budget. So it was only, I think, just a touch over $1 million, and it was an independent film, but it's acquired cult status because his very focus was on making a great story and telling a great tale. And it was only much later on when he actually worked on Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill and like Django Unchained, where he started to really experience that heavy commercial success because he was so recognizable. Back when he started out, he was very unknown, and even now, he'll probably tell you that his main focus is on creating great stories, but at the same time can concede that he needs to create great stories which are commercially viable. If he was just picking out any old film, he'd probably run out of money pretty quickly because he'd invest so much effort and time and resources into it, it probably wouldn't have much left at the end of it. So you need to, with him, I think he sort of understands both sides of the coin.
I mean, this is a really big question for all people that create content of any kind, whether they're, you know, international film directors down to people like myself or Clive Dyson who do home videos for YouTube. At what we don't have a lot of budget that we pour into it, I might add. $1 million would be unbelievable, but at some point everyone that's involved in the creative process does have to say, am I doing this for love, or am I doing it for fame, fortune, money? All of those things have a bit of a bearing, and when you get a guy like Quentin who focuses very intently on a story and tells it in a particular kind of way, you get the impression it's not the money product that he's actually looking for. I mean, I know that he's got to take that into the equation, but all of us as sort of amateur content creators are also working with the idea that it's the content that we love to do, and we've got the story to share, we've got the mechanism for sharing it, but maybe sooner or later we have to get a little bit more canny about how we market the stuff that we create. And that's always the interesting thing about Cinema Addicts, and what Cinema Addicts is going to do and what it's going to be in 2016, because you're involved in the marketing side of movies. You're involved in taking completed products and saying, hey, this is worth watching because, and it's it's that side of Cinema Addicts that I think has its own level of creativity. So in a way, that kind of leads me into the third slide that I'd like to bring up, which is talking about New Zealand films in the documentary sense. So I'll just bring this one up, Stuart, and present that to everyone. What's happening in the feature-length documentary scene in New Zealand? Are we going to see a lot more documentaries in cinemas in 2016, or are we going to see some really quality ones? Any ideas about that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier on, there's a David Farrier film which is called Tickled, which premiered at a prestigious Utah-based festival a short while ago, and that's produced some fantastic reviews from all sorts of people. I think Dennis Harvey from Variety magazine said that what sounds like a fun look at particularly outer subculture turns out to be no laughing matter. David Farrier and Dylan Reeves' documentary traces the New Zealand's duo's investigation of an online tickling video empire, behind which there lurks a monster of cyberbullying and litigiousness. So that gives a pretty good indication that a lot of the work which is being done, not only by David, but also by a lot of the other people that are working on documentaries at the moment, is actually quite serious. I think a big announcement which I'd like to mention, which came up last month, was when the Documentary International Film Festival was recognized by Academy Award as a qualifying festival for short documentary films. And that's big for our country's film industry, because it'll not only attract more high caliber films to the event, it'll also stretch the creative talents of our local filmmakers and compel them to produce higher quality work which can compete with the best of them on an international circuit. So that's actually quite exciting to hear about. And I think when that film festival gets going, there'll be some fantastic New Zealand documentaries in there.
Well, that's really good and interesting news to hear. I'd like to just share with our Kiwi Connection folk about the fact that I reviewed a film for Cinema Addicts quite recently, which was called Life Off Grid. And the way in which reviewers get films from Cinema Addicts is you've got to be pretty quick at putting your hand up to get a movie. And I put my hand up, got this one, and it absolutely dominated my life for about a week. I couldn't believe that in the review process of looking at a movie like this, I would become intrigued by not only how it was made, but the background of the people that were making it, what they had to say about other things than just their movie, how it was being promoted in New Zealand and beyond, because it was a Canadian documentary. And Life Off Grid turned out, from my perspective, just having to write a 400-500 word review for Cinema Addicts, it turned out that it changed my perspective on creativity in filmmaking. Now, I've always recognized that you bring a huge number of different creative processes to the filmmaking project. But essentially, this documentary was simply made by one guy and his photographer. And they got a grant from the Canadian government to make this film about people who had chosen to come off the national electricity grid. They were in remote places throughout Canada, places where you tend to get extreme weather conditions. And the first thing that struck me was their commitment to the project of making a documentary. It lasted, I think, from a while ago, almost 3 years. Now, that's an extraordinary level of commitment, and particularly in getting to some of these remote places caused a few challenges along the way as well. So Life Off Grid and doing a review of it, for me, became a transformational experience as well. And I was lucky enough to meet the guy that made the film what's the group that brought him out, Stuart? It wasn't Cinema Addicts.
It was the Film Sprites.
Film Sprites. They brought the filmmaker out. He was standing up in front of the audience, afterwards answering questions about it. And I was lucky enough to have an hour before the film with him. And all I can say is it opened my eyes to new possibilities about documentary. And I think that was probably the most interesting experience that I've had in the last 12 months. And it set me thinking, as a very minor little YouTube maker, how do I go about making movies in a more structured and creative kind of way? So, Stuart, you've got a team now, moving away from Kiwi Connections towards Cinema Addicts. You've got a team of reviewers. How many people review films for you?
We've currently got a team of 10, although we're looking to try and grow that to 20 by the end of this year.
Why the need for more reviewers? Is it simply the time that's available for people to get out and review all the movies?
Yeah, that is one element of it. The biggest one would be the opportunities to review films, because there's so many invitations and requests which come through. And then there may also be people as well who are only interested in reviewing certain types of film, people that say like movies from the 1960s or the 1970s, or only like rock and roll films, or Quentin Tarantino films, whatever they may be. There's always people that have those particular preferences. And I think when you've got people that go out and write about those films and actually learn all over again how to watch a film effectively and from a critical standpoint, it really does open your eyes and change your view on the whole movie viewing process. You're no longer a passive movie watcher. You're very much engaged, because you're looking for so many things and measuring so many different creative elements against what you're expecting, and seeing if that all comes together.
Yeah, creativity in movie making seems to me to involve the whole spectrum of creativity. So you've got writers, you've got directors, you've got producers, you've got people who create sets, you've got people who photograph, you've got people who make music, you've got people who do makeup, you've got people who make costumes. It's sort of again like live theatre in some ways, but beyond live theatre, because there are more variables in the movie making process. So then you need that content distributed, talked about and marketed effectively, and that's where your reviewers are kind of key to Cinema Addicts. So I thought this is a good point at which to just tell our viewers and Kiwi Connection that we're going to actually have a few things coming up in the next couple of months. One, Stuart and I will talk to a movie maker who's really only interested in the science fiction genre, I think. Would that be a fair comment? That's Demi Naboff. Is that right, Stuart? He's a science fiction filmmaker.
He's certainly very big into it at the moment with his current film.
Yeah, he's the guy who's really saying the world of virtual reality, this new method of enhancing our senses, is going to, in the long run, influence not just, I think, the world of filmmaking, but how we learn in general. So Stuart and I will be talking to Demi about that. Then I've also got the privilege of bringing Elise Macadam on, along with a friend of hers, a little after that. And Elise and her friend and I, and if you want to be in there, Stuart, you're very welcome to. We're going to talk about how to watch a movie, because in the world of media studies for school children, tertiary studies, etc., these are really important questions. Most people go into an art gallery, they look at a painting, and they don't know where to begin. They just sort of, oh, I like that, or I don't like that. Even more so when you're reading a book, even more so when you're watching a movie. There are ways in which you can watch movies that enhance the watching experience. And even the simple act of reviewing for cinema addicts seemed to me to enhance the act of watching the documentary. So Elise and myself are going to talk about how to watch a movie. And as a result of that, how to watch a movie, we hope to make an ebook out of it. Stuart, tell us a little about your ebook making activities from cinema addicts and beyond.
Yeah, well, the power of the ebook actually only really came to my attention when I began working at Perceptive Research. Up until then, I'd always thought ebooks were just like a cheap and goofy gimmick that only fools would download, because it was just written by any old Joe Schmo. But I actually began to think about it a lot more and realized that the power of making an ebook which can speak to a certain audience, and it's an opportunity for you to share your knowledge with people and help them improve their understanding about the process. So I haven't come up with a title yet on what my ebook's going to be called, or Cinema Addicts ebook's going to be called, because it'll be a group process, but it's going to focus a lot on marketing movies, and we're going to talk about things such as building connections with different media outlets and people, knowing your target audience. What do they look like? What are their interests? What are their pain points? Where do they go for information? We'll look at how determination is a big part, how you can no longer do like a blanket approach. You've got to sort of be very targeted and specific. And also as well, some of the creative ways in which you can market your movie. And also as well, if you're a filmmaker and all this sounds daunting to you, we're even going to look at including like a step-by-step process which you can take from start to completion, in regards to how you can market it effectively and how long it would likely take to do all these things.
I think one of the keys here is it's not just about making the movie. Now, I have a dream that one day the congregation that you and I will attend will actually make a movie about themselves. So we're not talking about one to be distributed through cinema, but clearly one to be distributed through YouTube. And in that, we need a realistic documentary appraisal of the congregational life. Do you think your step-by-step ebooks would be able to help us achieve that goal?
Well, I certainly hope they would. It would be a bit of a waste of time if they didn't. But yeah, no, I mean, look, the main reason this ebook is being written at the moment is because there's not a huge amount of resources available specifically on that. There's a lot of how-to articles and infographics and picture blogs on how you can do it or ways you can do it, but as far as actually nailing down and doing it, there's not a huge amount on that. So and the great thing about it is that we're working on the assumption that somebody's budget for marketing is $0. So we're going to come up with a lot of creative ways and make a lot of helpful suggestions to help people fast track the promotion of their film on a very limited budget.
Hey, that's great news, because that's exactly how it is with our congregational life in terms of YouTube and all of that. Stuart, I've got one final question that I want to share with the audience and also obviously with you. So there we go. I'm really interested in what's happening in international film. So moving from the local out of the ebook learning that we can apply, are there big trends happening? Do you see things happening across the movie industry that says there's new forms coming out, or digitalization is taking another leap forward in another way? Is there anything on that international scene you'd like to tell us about tonight?
Yeah, well, I remember in 2014 at the New Zealand Film Festival, there was a big talk around a film called Everything We Love, which is probably best known because it had a dual release in that people could either go to the cinema at Sky City where it was being screened and watch it there, or they could pay for a download fee and enjoy it from the comfort of their own home and watch it on live stream, which is actually quite an interesting idea. And it'd definitely be worth keeping an eye on that, because you might see some movies, particularly the smaller scale ones, starting to move in that direction. As far as the big films go, look, there's definitely some very good ones, that some of which I mentioned earlier on, such as the superhero ones, Batman versus Superman, Captain America, X-Men. There's been a recent George Clooney and Channing Tatum film directed by the Coen brothers called Hail Caesar, which is about a Hollywood fixer who wants to keep the studio stars in line. There's Pride and Prejudice. There's a new Jason Bourne film. There's Gods of Egypt, which is about a common thief who joins a mythical god on a quest through Egypt. There's the remake of The Jungle Book, Kung Fu Panda 3, Ghostbusters, The Fifth Wave, Boy, Duty Grandpa. Probably one of the more forgettable films, which is also coming up, is 50 Shades of Black, which you might know is the sequel to 50 Shades of Grey, which is a horrible book and film in every shape and form. But there's also some great ones as well. I mean, I recently went to see The Finest Hours film, which is a rescue documentary based on the US Coast Guard, rescued by a couple of people who were saving people from an oil tanker, and they only had a ship big enough for 12 people, and they brought back 32, which was amazing.
Yeah, that's a true story. We've got that on our hit list. It does look amazing, and it looks as if it's been particularly well crafted. You know, all the action that comes out of that kind of heroic effort. Was it the what year would it have been set in?
I believe it was in the 1950s, early 1950s.
Right.
It's very, very worthwhile. I would also say as well that another film which has been generating a bit of controversy, and you might have heard about it, David, it's the film Risen with Joseph Fiennes and directed by Kevin Reynolds. It came out a few days ago internationally, and will definitely be worth looking into, because it talks about the events after Jesus' crucifixion and the empty tomb from the eyes of a non-believer. So it'd be definitely worth exploring, no matter what your I guess religious convictions are, because it sort of brings up that question again, and it sort of challenges us to think very carefully about why we believe what we believe.
Oh, have you got anyone reviewing that in Cinema Addicts at present?
No, well, the invitation hasn't come through, so we can always put Reverend Dr. David Bell down for it.
Look, I'm putting my both hands up for that, Stuart. It's the kind of movie that I really sort of get intensely interested in. How do we portray these events from so long ago with all the modern creativity that we've got at our fingertips, to create creative tools rather. You mentioned, did you mention Jane Eyre and also some other live theatre on movie that's coming up, or has just come out? It looks as if that's sort of the art kind of theatre. Doing movies of live productions looks to be really very worthwhile for a number of people. I was talking to a couple of ladies after church this morning, and they had seen both of these recently. I'm fairly sure one was Jane Eyre, and I can't remember what the other was. I think it was a Shakespeare, Kenneth Branagh production.
Yeah, I think when you look at the film industry itself, it's, a lot of the time it's responding to the needs of the people, and there's always going to be that older market or that older generation, or as I'd call it, the wiser, more experienced generation who enjoy.
You just keep going on that line, brother.
Yep, I'll uphold it to a T. It's great because you need to cater to that market because people are going to like going to see those kinds of films, and particularly with the opportunity to have it available in so many ways, I think adds to the value of it rather than detracting from it. Movie piracy has obviously become a big concern, and having that a live online release in conjunction with an in-theatre release will definitely go to great measures to stop those sorts of problems.
Yeah, I think that's a really innovative, creative solution in itself. Stuart, I'm aware that we've got to 7:40, which is kind of the witching hour for us, isn't it? 45 minutes. Are there any final comments that you'd like to make tonight about Movies 2016 or Cinema Addicts 2016?
Yeah, the final thing I would say is that we've teamed up with the Coffee Cafe Trilogy, which is a horror thriller film series, and we're working very hard with the writer and director of the films, S.J. Hardy, to effectively do what the ebook's going to cover. We're going to work on a social media strategy, a marketing strategy, a release strategy, because it's a independently funded film, which has got massive amounts of potential to be something fantastic. So we've teamed up with them, and we're working very hard at the moment at all sorts of creative ways in which the world can know about Coffee Cafe and really know that story, because I think these days inbound marketing, which is it's the new face of marketing. People can't just be buying your product, they need to be promoting it as well, because word of mouth marketing is heavily undervalued these days by a lot of big corporations, but the small ones know that that's how you can get the best business and also as well generate the most interest. So that's been my big focus, is teaming up with them again and creating a winning formula with Cinema Addicts and Coffee Cafe. As for 2016, I would say it'll be the year of action hero movies. I'll call it right now.
Okay, well, we'll hold you to that, and we'll evaluate that in December 2016. One final comment that I think, when you use the term inbound marketing, of course, I think that's where Cinema Addicts does a huge reach out to the 15, 30-year-old age group. Churches like ours do their best possible outreach that they can muster up to a sort of 55-year-old upwards marketing group. I think churches have a much deeper understanding of what word of mouth is about than a lot of other businesses. But I don't think they're doing it effectively at present. I think that their own word of mouth strategies do need to be improved. And I suspect that the way of improving them is to piggyback on things like Cinema Addicts, team up with partnerships. There may well be something that Demi has to say to us. There may well be something that Elisa has to say to us that give us a bit more edge to what we're doing in the world of church. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much, Stuart. You provide lots of inspiration to old guys like myself. I don't know whether we're very wise, but we're certainly very old. And I think that your kind of approach could be utilised very successfully within Kiwi Connection. So Thank you again, and we'll say goodbye to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.